Stop hiring clones. Here's the truth about culture fit in game dev. If your interviews keep selecting for who you grab a beer with, you're not protecting culture, you're building an echo chamber. And if you swing the other way and pretend culture doesn't matter, you can make one bad hire that will destroy trust, feedback, and decision-making on your team. In this episode, I'll show you the two types of culture, taste versus operating system, so you know what's non-negotiable, what's optional, and how you can hire for collaboration without culturally inbreeding. Let's get into it. So I recently got pinged in the Building Better Games Discord. Someone wrote, "There's been a concerted effort to stop using culture fit as a reason to not hire people due to the perception that it creates echo chambers and promotes bias in who you hire. Yet, at the same time, hiring people just for their pedigree or potential, even if there are conflicting personalities during the interview, can utterly tank a game or even an entire studio if it's not a culture match. Culture matters a ton and makes or breaks teams, but the current mantra is to get outside perspectives to expand your team's knowledge and background. Finding someone who checks both of those boxes is nearly impossible. How do we reconcile these opposing ideas when trying to build teams?" This is a great question. Some of you may be facing this. You may realize that one misaligned hire could really disrupt the culture you're building within your org or team or startup or whatever it is. Because culture does matter. It isn't just a bunch of subjective opinions and who cares what anybody thinks about it or why those opinions are different between different people. Culture can also be viewed as the most fundamental layer of your organization, the hardest to change, and especially when it starts going wrong, the most difficult to fix. A story about this from my own life. I joined the military after I left college. It was well before I got into game dev. I was in the military for 4 years, and the whole time I was in, I knew something was off. And I didn't really think about it too hard. I just knew, man, it doesn't seem like I fit here. The way people in the military want to act, I don't like it. I think there's a better way. The military had a lot of traditions. Those traditions were very important to everybody. They had standard operating procedures. There was a strict hierarchy and a deep respect for those above you, but not a lot of questioning what those above you were doing in most circumstances. All of this ran afoul of how I wanted to operate. I wanted to be a more dynamic leader. I wanted to be empowered. I wanted to be able to give critical feedback to change the system if it didn't make sense. I didn't like operating in places where we're all doing it because the people before us did it, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, I did eventually leave the military after my time in service. And at the time, I remember thinking, well, that's because the military sucks and isn't good and they're doing all these things wrong. Actually, the military is a very effective organization, but it had a culture and a way of operating that didn't match how I wanted to operate and how I liked behaving as a leader. This caused no end of problems. And so when I could get out, I did. And only later did I realize, oh, there were a lot of people in the military who actually liked those constraints. They liked that culture. They loved the pros of it. And, there were always cons, but they actually enjoyed being inside of that system. For me, it didn't work. And that was okay. I self-selected out and I went to a different organization in game development where there was a totally different culture. Now, while I was in the military, I did adapt to it. I was able to be effective, but it was hard. It ground on me. It was difficult to get up every day and go to work some of the time. And that was just because I didn't really like how things were going, how it operated at that deep foundational cultural level. So there's a cost when culture doesn't match between you and the organization you're a part of, or between different parts of your organization. And it's important to be aware of that. But not all culture is created equal. Some culture matters a lot for an organization being successful, while some we could almost say is taste. So it's important when you say culture to realize what you're talking about. Are you talking about, hey, we all share a sense of humor, or we all like the same music? Or are we talking about, hey, we all understand and relate to hierarchy in a similar way? Or we all think about feedback or how we relate to players or the audience of whatever our product or game is the same way? Those things are very different. And if I'm misaligned around, what my preference in music is, that probably isn't that big a deal. But if I'm misaligned with the fundamental values of an organization, that's going to cause more problems. I do, to some extent, agree with the advice to not hire for culture fit, but you should be thinking about fit from the lens of how does that culture relate to the behaviors that allow us to collaborate and succeed as a company and organization. That is very important. Let me give some more examples from both. So bucket number one, I'm going to call this the taste culture side of things. You have to be really careful here, because if you focus on having everybody agree on these things, I think you're just going to limit your probability of success, and you're going to lead to a lot of bias being brought into your organization. Not to say that there might not be some norms here inside of your culture, but you don't want this to be restrictive necessarily of who you hire. So that is things, as I mentioned earlier, sense of humor, musical preference. What are your favorite games or genres or platforms? The whole airplane test, or would I grab a beer with them? Charisma or polish, introvert versus extrovert, lifestyle similarity, educational pedigree or educational, everybody's an Ivy League or not. Did we all join fraternities or not? Political or religious affiliation or alignment. Outside of places where that's very important from a missional perspective, all of these things I consider taste culture. They're not likely to have a huge impact on whether you succeed or fail. And there are some exceptions that I can talk about later. If you align your culture, though, whenever you're hiring for people in these sorts of categories, I think this is where the echo chamber comes from. I think this is where people hire people like them. Oh, you like the same things I like. You do the same things I do. We can go and do hobbies together. We all like the same shows and movies and television and music and whatever else. So that's bucket one. Now let's talk about bucket two. This is a very different bucket, and I think this one actually is important for you to think about and align culturally within your organization so that you can collaborate together to succeed in game development. So, some examples of this. What sort of conflict resolution styles are people okay with or comfortable with? What are the norms around feedback? Where does decision-making authority come from? How do we relate to hierarchy, and what are the expectations of the hierarchy? How comfortable are people with uncertainty? How much transparency do we expect? What does ownership mean, and what are the boundaries of it? What does it mean to look at quality as a craft versus the ideal of shipping when it's good enough? How do we balance that? For leaders or for anybody, when we're making decisions, how important is data versus an individual's judgment? When we think about the purpose of why we're there, are we trying to serve the player? Are we trying to make money? Are we trying to realize the founder's vision for a game? What happens when someone fails or struggles? How does the organization respond? How does the individual respond? How do we want them to respond? And what's the time horizon we're focused on? Short, mid, long term? These things matter a lot. And if you get all of these mixed up, if you have a lot of different leaders in a lot of different spaces here with a lot of different assumptions around what good looks like, you're going to have a lot of collisions and clashes. And that's going to make collaboration and succeeding together hard. So these are things you actually do want to hire for and try to align people around. And that's not an exhaustive list. I'll have a longer one later, and I'll have one in the show notes that you can look through. But this is really easy to get wrong. Even very smart studios that are trying to do the right things, they're trying to hire people that are similar to them, they get this wrong because they go into that culture as taste side. And when you go there, you hire effectively clones. Clones feel great in interviews, you want to hang out with them, but you end up with groupthink. You end up with a lack of diverse thought around whatever problem it is you're facing, and you have blind spots that are shared across the broad organization. A good friend of mine and a great technical and operational leader named Richard Hensley called this cultural inbreeding when he was talking to me about this. This is the idea of creating this homogenous culture. You want to avoid that cultural inbreeding where everybody's kind of the same, they see things the same way. That's not how you're going to solve the complex problems of game dev the best. Everybody might agree, but it might not be the right thing, and you're not going to have anybody there to get you onto a different and better track. But this alternative view that you shouldn't hire for culture fit at all, that's all just going to lead to bias and all sorts of issues and discrimination and lots of problems. I think this is a mistake too. If you just focus purely on someone's skills or background or pedigree or whatever, you're not actually neutral. You're letting your culture get picked for you by whoever you hire, and especially the leaders you hire early. And those high influence hires are going to shape and reshape the culture into whatever they're used to or whatever their preferences are. And it might not be what you want as the leader of an organization. Now, any company can pick from either of the buckets. They can pick the culture as taste or the culture as operating system for collaboration, and they can say, this is who we want to be. And actually, I think game dev companies have a very important question to ask studios and publishers whenever they're hiring people, which is something that is on the taste side might be, how much of a gamer are you? And that could be really important to some companies, and they may choose to say, look, we only hire people who we feel match the culture of gamer, understand that, can relate to that audience. Maybe that's fair. Other game dev studios might say that's not important to us, and so they have a broader pool, but they might hire some people who don't understand the audience as well, don't understand gamers or games as much. Okay, trade-offs there. That is one that is not something that I would consider a core operating system for collaboration, but could be a big deal inside of the game dev space. So that's an example of someone pulling from that taste side and saying, look, this is important to us, and maybe that's a really wise thing to do in some cases. So don't feel like, hey, I can never ever pick a taste thing, a cultural taste thing, but recognize that most of what you should be thinking about when you're thinking about hiring for culture fit are the more culture as operating system, culture as base way that we collaborate and interact with each other. So if you pull this together and you go, okay, I'm a leader in a space. And by the way, you don't have to be the head of the company to do this. You could actually do it even within a much smaller context, even on a team. You could say, I don't need perfect candidates because I'm not going to find them, right? No one's going to line up just exactly with what you want, with hitting all the cultural notes you want on the operating system side while having just a lot of tons of great diversity. On the other side, you're going to get mixes. People are mixes. No one's going to be exactly right. That's okay. You need to figure out which lanes in this cultural system are non-negotiable. Again, I think most of them should be on that culture as operating system or culture as key to collaboration side of things. And you should not have as many as the culture as taste side of things. The more of those you get, I think the more you're actually limiting what's possible. And once you understand what those key lanes are that are non-negotiable on either side, then you can invite diversity everywhere else. And that's awesome. That's really great. I want to also call out, a lot of times people tend to think that there's a right or wrong way to do this. And that was me when I left the military from that earlier example. I thought the way the military did it was really, really dumb. And I knew a better way, and I didn't know why the military was the way it was. Later on, when I thought more about it and learned more about organizational design and a bunch of other things, I had a lot more understanding for why the military was the way it was, and it actually made a lot of sense. But at the time, I was just like, well, they're wrong and I'm right, and that's the way it is. And I see this a lot too. And that also leads to the idea of only my culture is the one that works. So I'm going to cover some things that are on that cultural operating system side. I'm just going to walk through some pros and cons. I have preferences around this, and I also have things that I think are better or worse for the space of game development. Although, as I say that, I realize that some people in game development are doing very different work than other people in game development. Some people are out there doing R&D on some crazy new technology that who knows if it's going to work or not, while other people are doing a remaster of a 20-year-old product with a known audience. There might be different cultural norms that are optimized for those two different environments. And when you're creating a game studio or a publisher or whatever, you need to be thinking about like, well, where do we want to be? And you should be trying to understand what the best culture is that matches the problems that you're trying to solve, but also aligns to what you consider your values, your ethics, those sorts of things. So, just to capture this idea, most of these run on a spectrum. It's not this one's right and that one's wrong. It's, look, there are pros and cons, and those pros and cons manifest in different ways depending on where you are and your context. The two spectrums I'm going to talk about real quick and just give you some idea of the range there. One is about decision-making, the other's about feedback, and there's different ways companies can do this. So let's start by looking at decision authority. I'm just going to split this into probably an unfair binary. On one end, you have fully distributed autonomy to everybody, and the other, you have a centralized authority model. So on extreme A, the distributed autonomy, basically we're pushing information down to everybody so that everyone can make their own decisions as they go. Advantages of this, you get speed at the point of contact, basically. Wherever anybody is, they can make a decision, they have information, they can go with it. It means that there's less bottlenecking inside of the organization. There's more empowerment, and I think there's going to be more retention of senior talent. I think also of leaders. Leaders are going to feel like they can grow there. Even junior leaders are going to be excited by the opportunities that provides them. And it's also going to scale better with complexity and certain types of chaos, because if context remains strong, if we continue to give everybody a lot of information so they can make good decisions, they're going to be able to do that no matter how large the organization gets, and we can continue to react as things grow and change and evolve within our structure. There are some cons to this, though. One is you're going to get inconsistent decisions across teams. Maybe that's fine with you, but that is a con. You could have completely different operating systems as different leaders in different places decide little bits and pieces of how they work and what they're focused on and what's important to them. because again, you've given all that distributed autonomy. It also does require a lot of time spent in context sharing and alignment, a lot more meetings. I always say that if you have an organization that you want autonomous and aligned simultaneously, then that means you got to spend a lot of time talking to each other. Not everybody likes that. And it does burn a lot of opportunity cost in those meetings, in those conversations, writing those documents or sharing those emails or making little videos or whatever it is. However it is that the leaders of the organization are just constantly trying to push context down in different parts of the organization, or trying to talk to each other so that everyone can make good decisions. A lot of time, a lot of investment, a lot of energy spent there. You also have this higher risk of local optimization. You have teams that might optimize for what they know in their space without realizing what's going on at the bigger picture. Again, that can be because not all the information got down, or it might just be because, hey, we're just making decisions locally because that's what we're supposed to be doing. And you may have some teams that are doing great with that, and other teams that are really struggling with that or not figuring out how to support each other really well. Does this sound familiar? You're in a leadership role at a game studio. Everyone is busy working. No one has any time. But the actual game itself isn't in a good spot. Maybe it's the tech. Maybe it's the lack of a validated prototype. Maybe it's that every person seems to have a different idea about what we're trying to build. But you've got a job. There are reports to send, meetings to schedule and facilitate, the occasional season of performance reviews to go through. And everyone is always so busy. When you step back, it makes you wonder if everyone is just going to keep slowly walking towards the abyss until the project or game fails. Is this what it means to be a leader in games? In tech? To endlessly repeat the same sequence of meetings without really moving the needle? To spend hours trying to get Jira tickets and dashboards where they should be? To pretend that everything is fine when you know deep down it really isn't? It doesn't have to be this way. You can make a difference. You can help your team and game succeed, but sometimes you need a bit of help to get there. I've started a game dev leadership accelerator. It aims to level up leaders who see opportunities to make a difference but don't know how to capitalize on them. We'll walk through what it means to lead well and give you tools to understand your organization's challenges and implement changes to overcome them. Game dev is hard. Knowing how to lead will give you an edge. It will still be hard, but you'll be ready to tackle it. If you're interested, let me know below, hit the link. I hope to see you in the accelerator because I believe better leaders will help teams make better games, and I look forward to someday playing what you create. So, that's one extreme, distributed autonomy. What about centralized authority? This is a viable model. Many companies and organizations have run on centralized authority models for a very long time. Pros of it: there's a coherence of vision. Because there's fewer decision makers, there's often less contradiction, and there's less alignment cost between those people. So it's easier to know, okay, this is where we're supposed to be going if you actually set up those communication chains. You don't have as many people deciding on their own what might be happening. It can be easier to coordinate as well because everybody's looking to the same few leaders in order to get their marching orders and understand what we do next, where should we go, what's the next call, et cetera, et cetera. I don't make that independently. I look to someone else. And in certain types of crises, you can have an advantage where, again, sometimes on like a battlefield environment, the distributed autonomy can be really useful, but sometimes when you need everybody to do the same thing at the same time, if everybody knows, hey, I look to guidance from here, then when everybody does that under crises, everybody's going to move in the same direction. We're all going to look to that. We're going to listen for that direction, and then we're going to go in the same direction. We're not going to step on each other's toes. We're not going to collide and get in each other's way. Has some cons to it, though. Biggest one, bottlenecks. You tend to have fewer leaders. They have to make all the decisions, and so there can be bottlenecking around that. If I need to know what the decision is and I'm at the ground layer, then I'm passing information up and up and up and waiting for it to come back down, and those people are overwhelmed with how much of that they have to do, and that can be very, very difficult. Also, the top can get disconnected from reality. Where in the distributed autonomy model, one of the challenges is pushing all that information down. In the centralized authority, we have to figure out how to effectively push all that information up. And that is not an easy thing to do, nor are the few people that make decisions easily able to absorb all that information. So it is common for the decision makers to become disconnected from what's actually going on the ground. And then they're starting to give directives that don't make sense, but everybody's following them because that's what you do inside of the context of the organization. This can often lead to talent frustration, where leaders who want to be empowered, who want to have agency, but are at a lower level of an organization and realize they don't, are like, well, what the heck am I doing here? Why am I here? Or I don't feel like I have any agency. Devs are like, I want to have the ability to make changes, but I can't. There's nothing I can do about the system because there's a centralized authority model. So that's decision authority, two different extremes. I'm going to talk about another one. These are just two examples. Again, these are not like the only things on this side. But let's talk about the feedback system. So what is the feedback system you have? On one end, you might have something like a continuous Candor model, where we're expecting regular feedback to be given around the products, to the people, from anyone to anyone. You go directly to someone and you tell them, hey, had some feedback for you, and, let's talk about what I thought you did really well, what you didn't do well, et cetera, et cetera. That's going on constantly. In the other, you have a structured or formal feedback model where there's some number of reviews, maybe annual or semi-annual or whatever it is. There's a flow of feedback that should go through managers. Managers might be the ones who determine what feedback is considered valid to send down to an individual. And so you don't go directly to the other party. You talk through the systems, the review structures, or talk to leaders and have leaders talk to each other about what is and is not going well. Not a lot of direct. That, again, not that continuous Candor. So on the extreme A, the continuous Candor model, everybody's giving feedback and getting feedback all the time. This can have some serious pros to it. One, people realize really quickly when things aren't going well because people will tell them, and they can adjust and learn and grow and adapt to that. There will also be less surprise when it comes to their time to be reviewed. So when their manager shows up and says, hey, here's what I heard about you, they're like, yep, I know, because everybody's been telling me about that and I've been working on it as we've gone. That lack of surprise is a big advantage. It's a big win. I think it also can go to a place where it normalizes tough conversations. To be in a place that constantly gives feedback is to develop a relatively thick skin, both about the work you do and how you show up, because you're going to constantly be getting feedback if those things aren't what other people are expecting or want to see. And so you get used to that. And that actually has a real advantage to it. Inside of organizations that do this a lot, and that do this in a healthy way, you can have a lot of people who are able to have hard conversations and they're not scared of them. It's part of the job. I actually was in an environment where the leader had us all sit down and give each other a bunch of feedback. And like the first time it happened, it was kind of awkward and scary. And then as it kept happening, it just became more natural and flowing, and people were able to handle it all a lot better. There are some cons to this, though. This continuous Candor, it can be exhausting. You can be constantly like, oh my gosh, I'm just trying to do something, and no matter what I do, 17 people give me feedback. There can just be this constant critique element of it, and you always feel like I have to, oh shoot, I realized I didn't like how somebody did something, now I've got to find time to go give feedback. I think that there's more training that's required in this, because people do need to develop that thick skin and be able to have those tough conversations, and that's not something everybody is naturally inclined towards. Again, coming back to that idea of what culture do you want and what culture do people want to work in. So there's a requirement of trust between parties, because if you're giving feedback in the absence of trust, it's not going to work. There's more training that's required, there's thicker skins, and that can be tiring. It can be something that grinds people down. Also, it can slow execution, especially if it's overdone. Someone can be getting feedback, they can be getting contradictory feedback. Oh, they said this, but then this other person said this, but then this other person said this, and you have someone spinning in circles trying to figure out, how do I respond to all this feedback? Again, some training can help there, but training takes time and effort. And so, there you go. It's a con. All right, let's go to the structured or formal feedback model, where there's clear lanes, scheduled reviews, everything happens when it's supposed to. We don't do a lot of feedback to each other outside of those moments. Pros of this: it's predictable. People know when they're going to get feedback. They can set up for that. There's less emotional churn throughout the rest of the year, or whatever, quarter, 6 months, whatever it is. It can protect focus time. It can allow people, hey, I'm doing my work. I'm focusing in on my work. I'm not worried about getting a ton of feedback about it all the time. I can focus on getting something done. And so if you want execution momentum, it can be like, I'm just working. I'm getting all my things done. I probably know that my manager will tell me if I'm doing something egregious, but otherwise I'm kind of rolling, and that's okay. At review time, I'll handle review time. It's also easier to ensure consistency. You can have your managers coming together, training together around those key moments where feedback is given, about how do we distribute feedback, how do we talk to each other about feedback, and these sorts of things. Cons: people will not get feedback in a timely way, and humans respond best to feedback when it's given in a timely way. And so that can lead to problems lingering and people not adjusting to match the feedback that they get. Because if all I get is twice a year a giant dump of feedback, I'll probably not be able to respond to all of it super well. And so I might take like a couple things and try to improve on that. But it'll make it harder for me to make those micro adjustments and improve myself in a faster way based on the good feedback. Also, surprises can feel really punitive, right? Like, let's say you're at a place where you do annual review cycles and you realize that for the last 9 months, I've been doing something that was annoying everybody around me, but nobody told me, because they all told my manager, and my manager put it in a file, and then we talked about it in my annual review, because that's how we do feedback here. That can feel really bad. It can feel like, I could have changed this. I could have done better. What's going on? Also, just to reiterate that idea of like it can cause people to be slow to adapt. Okay, so there's two spectrum examples. One in that decision-making space of distributed autonomy versus centralized authority. Another on the feedback side, from a continuous candor model to a more structured or formal feedback model. These are trade-offs. Companies have been successful operating in all of the quadrants you could create there between these two models. But if you have a mismatch within an organization, that's where we might cause pain. If you have different leaders advocating for different things or responding in different ways to each other as they relate in these systems, that's going to cause pain. Just to give you some quick other cultural operating system or key to collaboration style things that you might think about. One is conflict. Do we want direct conflict? If so, what kind? Do we want indirect conflict? If so, what kind? Related to hierarchy, do we want strict hierarchies that everybody follows? And how do we relate to those hierarchies? Do we want that to be more fluid and a little flatter? And related to uncertainty, how do people in this organization, how should they relate to uncertainty? Or is it something that people thrive in? Is it something that people demand clarity and need you to resolve for them because that's important for them to do their job? Around ownership, how does that happen? Is it something that's assigned? Do people take it on by themselves? Around transparency, is the default that we tell everybody everything, or that everything's on a need-to-know basis and we try to keep that information from distracting everybody else? And then related to quality, or deadlines. Is this more about us hitting a craft quality bar that's really important because that's the brand that we have and that's super important to us? Or is this a ship first and it's okay if it's a little bit jank or doesn't look as clean or we can polish it up later? Where do you want to be? Who do you want to be in your organization? And finally, something I mentioned earlier, what's your view of the player? Are you a player trust first sort of organization? Are you a revenue first sort of organization? Are you a founder's dream or vision of what the game could be sort of an organization? These are different things. If you're misaligned in some of these, it's going to cause problems. Now, what's important to note about this, and especially for those of you who are in smaller organizations, be they subparts of larger organizations or doing startups, whatever it might be, the early members, and especially the early leaders, they have an outsized impact on this. The organization's strengths and weaknesses will very much reflect the strengths and weaknesses of the leaders of that organization. And their weaknesses and their blind spots will get embedded as much as their strengths will. Leaders need to take this more seriously than most, both because they tend to be the ones doing the hiring, and so they can really muck things up, and also because their strengths and their weaknesses are reflected. So that's you too. Your strengths and your weaknesses out there, if you're a leader, are being embedded into your org. Be careful of this. It should terrify you. I mentioned earlier, I think companies of any size should be thinking about what their culture is, what really matters to them. It is okay if your culture evolves to some extent over time. Imagine a startup game company. They're trying to create a game and they manage to succeed. And suddenly they've got players. And when they were really small, they took tons of risks and they tried all kinds of wild things and they were constantly breaking the game in order to as fast as they could test and get it in front of play testers and whatever else. Now they've got 50,000, 100,000, 500,000 people that play their game every day, maybe for a short period of time, maybe in an ongoing way if it's a live service product. It is wise for them to realize, oh shoot, we may want to be a little more cautious about the changes we shove into this game now, because we might break trust with players if we just go ham and keep throwing in features and tinkering with things like we did when we were in exploration and just trying to find something that might work. It's now time to be cautious, to bring a little bit of care into our organization, to maybe look at some of the data we're getting, to try smaller tests. And that is a cultural shift, but a wise one. It's an evolution of the company based on the success it's had. It doesn't mean we want to stop risk-taking or we want to stop making big bets, but it does mean we need to interpret them through the lens of we've got a product and that product has players and those players are relying on us to keep this experience fun and engaging. And so continuing to willy-nilly break things or mess up things or build systems that might not make sense, it's not a good play. Now, again, obviously you don't want to make a system that doesn't make sense when you're in ideation or exploration either, but it's more okay to be throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks early on than when you have a live product. The point of this, culture can evolve. Here's the problem. Many organizations don't actually know what their culture is, and so when it evolves on its own. It evolves in an undirected way. I see this so much where companies that go through that thing I just described, they have a game, it gets bigger than they expected, or it hits, right? And now they've got a ton of players. And what do? They start growing and they go, oh, we need to mature the organization. And they go and they look at other big companies and they hire in leaders from those big companies because, well, they know what to do. They know how to run large-scale organizations. Kind of. They know how to run large-scale organizations with the culture and expectations of whatever that other company was. You may have a different set of cultural expectations around how you want to operate. And when you bring that person in, you usually bring them in as senior leaders to mature your org or level everybody up or whatever. What they're going to do is probably change your culture to look more like what they're used to. You have to be very careful of this. If you are not, what will end up happening is you'll bring in a bunch of stuff you didn't want. And I think this is why so many small companies, as they grow, they pull in big, successful company leaders, and that ends up bringing in bureaucracy. It ends up bringing in things that slow everybody down. Some of that, again, might be normal because, hey, now we've got a successful product. We have to be more careful. But a lot of times they get more than they bargained for. And actually, they lose what made their company special. They just become another company with a successful product that is bureaucratic and slow and ineffective. It's too many of those in games. We don't want more. Another important part of this, culture is not the 7 pithy phrases you put on your culture doc or that's on posters all around your studio or whatever. That is not your culture. Your culture is the set of behaviors that are considered normal or acceptable or expected and those that are not. That is the culture. Everybody shares a picture of that. That is what your culture is more than anything else. And that's what you want to be thinking about up front. All right. So actions you can take. Look, I have a long list. I'm going to put this list in the show notes as well, but I'm going to read it off here. These are the cultural things I think you should think about or know about your organization. Wherever you are as a leader, even if you're not the founder or the CEO or one of the very influential people, think about where your organization is, how well you align to it, and if you were to hire people, what you would want them to align to. And I'm going to go through what I consider some of the core cultural operating system sides of this, like the things that help us collaborate successfully. So some of them I talked about earlier, but let's run through the whole list. What I want you to do is sort of go, okay, when you hear each of these, where is your company and where should it be in order for it to be successful in the context of game development? First, conflict resolution style. What's acceptable, what's not. You don't have to have just one, might be a bunch. How do we want to resolve conflict within the organization? Second, approach to feedback. Third, how do decisions get made? Fourth, approach to hierarchy. How tall or flat do we want the organization? How do we relate between layers? Fifth, comfort with uncertainty. Sixth, transparency of information. What information can everybody see? What can't they see? Can everybody see everything? It's a radically transparent organization? Is it purely need to know? Seventh, how do you handle ownership? Is it something that people take on for themselves, or is it something that is handed to people? What does it mean to have ownership? Do people own tasks? Do they own outcomes? Do they own big, giant goals? What about leaders? What about devs? How does that change? What are the boundaries between roles and responsibilities? Is it a place where I have my strict role and my strict responsibilities, and that's what I'm supposed to stay inside of? Are we expecting people to regularly go outside of their role and outside of their responsibilities? What happens when people collide in that space? Ninth, how do I get my daily work? Something I choose? Is something someone hands me? 10th, what's our risk tolerance and where? 11th, how do individuals grow? Is it something we expect people to take care of on their own? Maybe we toss them some money. Is it something we expect to help them with? Are they supported by the organization? Do we send them to training or bring training into the org? 12th, what's the expected level of diplomacy in conversation? Some places that are actually pretty direct with feedback are still quite diplomatic and polite as they give it. Others are just pure blunt all the way. It's very raw, and that has some pros and some cons to it. Where are you on that? What's the expected level of diplomacy in conversation? 13th, what are the communication norms? Some of the others overlap with this one, but what are the ways in which we want to see people communicating? How much? Styles that we consider appropriate or not. 14th, how important is craft quality? 15th, how important are deadlines? 16th, how much do we bias towards looking at data versus trusting an individual's gut or judgment? 17th, what do we expect from people from a work pace perspective? Are we a sustainable organization? Are we overworking everyone all the time? What is it that we expect? Some people really like to work in a place that pushes them 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Others can't stand that and would prefer to do 4 days of 8 hours and be really effective in that because of the type of work they do or the type of organization they're a part of. You do not want to be someone who wants to work 72 hours a week and then be surrounded by people who are cutting out early because that's all that they had energy for today. 18th, plans and planning. Are they rules? Must they be followed? Do we have to hit every deadline and every plan? Are they suggestions? Are they guidelines? Do we expect them to change and adapt? 19th, how important are our values to us and which values? 20th, how important is money relative to everything else? 21st, what is our view of the player or audience or customer? Are they someone we're trying to extract money from? Look, there are companies and organizations that do that. Are they someone we feel we're in partnership with? Are they someone we're serving? Are they someone we aspire to be? Whatever it is, right? However you relate to your audience. 22nd, what's the role of process? Do we hate it, but we recognize some of it's necessary? Do we love it and want more of it? And we bring in people who can run it and manage it. And that's how we want to be efficient and get the job done. 23rd, what happens when someone struggles or fails? What's the organization response? What do we expect from the individual? Do they get fired instantly? Is this a place where you can learn and grow and it's okay to make a ton of mistakes? How many? Companies need to figure this out. 24th, what time horizon are we focused on? Short term, midterm, long term? It's easy to say we should all focus on the long term, but the reality is sometimes if you focus only on the long term, short term falls apart and you never get there. Depending on where you are in your context, your company might have a general default that you want for leaders and devs. Now, I just listed 24 things. Hopefully you were thinking through your organization. And as I went through each one, you thought, where are we? What is normal here? Maybe, again, these aren't necessarily spectrums with two ends to them. Sometimes they're more complex shapes and multidimensional. That's okay. Where are you? Where's your org? Are you reasonably aligned with your org? As you hire people, are they reasonably aligned with your org? What does it mean to bring someone in who can match what's already there? I also mentioned that there's less essential cultural elements, the more taste-focused ones. Again, you can pick to make those important to your organization. If it's really valuable for everybody to like war movies for some reason, okay, great. We like war movies at this company. You can do that. You can have hiring questions around that to make sure that that's something that we all agree to. And cool, you can pick. You get to pick at your company or even sometimes within your smaller org or team. Just know that those taste things will restrict the amount of diversity of thought that you're going to bring in, because restricting on any of these axes will restrict. The thing to realize is that with some of those cultural operating system things, it's worthwhile to restrict because the conflict that emerges from having two people who have very different decision-making frames and are constantly arguing and fighting with each other, the cost of that is very high and it's not worth it. What you might gain from the fact that they have these different perspectives is lost in the fact that they can't get along and neither can the team that they're trying to run together. So be aware of that. If you want to see some more taste or cultural elements, check out the show notes below. Last thing I want to say on this whole thing. Another way to look at cultural differences is not the internal studio culture, but it's actually the global differences in culture that emerge. All I'll say here, those cultural differences can give people different defaults. Someone considered very expressive in Oxford might be considered reserved in Milan. It's important to kind of have some awareness of this because if you expect everyone to behave the same as a default, you're going to be surprised at just how different parts of the world engage. And especially as game dev gets more global, more remote, there's more outsourcing going on, more contracting from different parts of the world. Just be aware those cultural things are still important and the defaults might be very, very different. The expectations might be very, very different. Something to keep in mind. Okay. So that pretty much wraps up this episode. You've got your two different types of culture, one of which I think matters a lot, those operating system base assumptions that are going to help you collaborate type of culture. And then there's the taste culture. Companies get to pick which ones matter to them. I think they should spend time thinking about that and picking that. And you should be hiring primarily along the lines of what is going to help us all collaborate well to be successful, so that the operating system side of culture, and you should probably have fewer of the things that are in the taste space to avoid just a lot of bias, a lot of echo chambers, groupthink type of stuff. Hope this has been helpful. Hope this has helped you also navigate that tricky problem of everybody's telling me I shouldn't hire for culture fit. Simultaneously, when you don't hire for culture fit, it often becomes a mess. Correct. There are different types of culture, and you get to pick what matters to your organization. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit subscribe. Really helps the channel. Appreciate you.